creeps! Andy here. I have missed you. It has been a long time. I am very thankful that I am actually feeling better for the first time all month. But I have a very exciting video. I'm going to be going through and showing you every book that I had read in 2023. I'll give you a little overview of how it's looking because I know you can't see all the books from where you are, but that's because, oh god, that's heavy. That's a lot of books, man. But that's just because I have to keep them in some sort of order. So, really quickly, I'm not going to be saying which ones are extreme horror and which ones are regular, so you know, keep that in mind if you're interested in any of these books. I'm going to be giving a real quick synopsis of each one because I think I read 103-ish, 104-ish books. I don't know. I've divided them through the month that I've read them, and then I will be listing them in order of which I've read them. I did, in the middle of last year, rank the first half of books that I've read, so let me know if you care to hear the ranking of the second half books. I can do that. Or if it doesn't matter because you know my favorites already. So I don't know. Let me know if that's a video that you want. But otherwise, I think that's it. Let's just get started. Some of them I don't have the physical copy to. So either people are borrowing them or I read them as an ebook. There were one or two that I listened to on Audible. Yeah, I think that's it. Some of them, this is the second, third, fourth time that I've read the books. But most of them are new. I'll try to remember to tell you which ones I've read before, but I can't guarantee. But let's just jump into it. Oh man, this is gonna be a feat. I hope that you guys are ready for a long video. I'll try to be quick about it, but you know me, I can't stop talking about books, so no promises. Hopefully you guys can see the book that I'm talking about. So let's begin with my January books. Okay, the first one that I read of 2023 was You by Carolyn Kepnes. This was turned into a TV show, and it's about this creepy stalker guy who creepily stalks this girl, and that's kind of what it's about. The next one I have, The Ravenous Dead by Darcy Coates. This is number 2 in the Gravekeeper series. It's about a girl who wakes up in the woods, doesn't remember her past, who she is. She just knows she's being chased. She runs to a nearby town, befriends some people in the town, and then they're slowly trying to figure out who she is and what happened in her past. Oh, and she can also see dead people. The third one that I read was Don't You Cry by Mary Kubica, and I gotta be honest, I remember very little about this. Oh yes, there's a girl who disappears from her apartment and her roommate's trying to figure out what happened to her. There's also another town that's talked about where a woman is doing kind of weird things in a coffee shop, and there's the main character there is a boy who's kind of studying this girl and trying to figure out who she is, and then the story kind of comes back together. Okay, next one is Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. This is about a mom who ends up passing away, and you're trying to figure out what happened to her, if maybe there was some foul play or if she ended up taking her own life. And you have an outsider, her sister, coming to the town and trying to figure things out as well, but kind of everybody's keeping secrets and you don't really get the full story and everything's kind of looped back around. And yeah, that's that one. Next we have Hidden Pictures by Jason. I know I'm going to pronounce his last name wrong. It's written on his Instagram if you want to know the correct way to pronounce it. But this is about a young couple who has a child and they're hiring a nanny for the child. And so the nanny comes, but the child starts drawing really creepy pictures. Let me find one of the pictures for you. And the pictures are used throughout the story, which I thought was a pretty neat way of, you know, creeping people out, a unique experience in a book. And yeah, and then the story continues to unfold from there. The Whisper Man by Alex North is about a group of young, I can't remember if it's young boys or young children, but they are abducted and murdered by a serial killer. And there's also a different killer who's in jail, and so the cops go to speak to him to see if they can kind of figure out what's going on. They don't know if it's a copycat or what. And then there's a man who has a young boy, and the young boy starts acting creepy and doing weird and saying weird things. They call it the Whisper Man because before the children disappear, they hear a man whispering at their window or door. Next, I read Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House. This is about a family who loses their parents to children who lose their parents in an unfortunate accident, and so they're left to kind of handle the property of the house, but it ends up being haunted. And I read Paul Tremblay's The Cabin at the End of the World. This is a reread for me, and this is about two men who go camping with their daughter. People break into their cabin and hold them hostage and say that they must willingly sacrifice one of their group, their own, or the world will end. Let's move on to February. Next up, I read Bret Easton Ellis's The Shards, the writer of American Psycho, and this, I believe, is the only other like straight horror book that he's written. I might be mistaken, but it has been a long time since he's written a horror book, and so yeah, The Shards came out. This is about a serial killer in Los Angeles. Is it in the 80s? I think it takes place in the 80s. And Bret Easton Ellis is his own main character in the book. Such a unique perspective, I gotta tell you. The most unreliable narrator there is. You have the serial killer, but then opposite that you have this like cults that's doing weird things in the town as well. And then you have Bret Easton Ellis and his friends who kind of get mixed up with one or both or none of them. And the story continues from there. Very nihilistic, like Less Than Zero, and then kind of weird horror elements as well added in there, like American Psycho. How can I even describe this book? It's just it's weird. It's a wild ride. The next one that I read was The Haunting of Ashburn House by Darcy Coates, and forgive me, but I've read so many Darcy Coates books that some of them I just can't keep straight. Okay, it's about a girl who inherits an old house and then strange things start happening. It was her grandmother's home and she was never close with her grandmother, so she's trying to figure out who is there and what is happening to the house that she just inherited. The next one I read is The Riding Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is about, you'll never guess it, a riding retreat. It's about these young girls who are selected to go on a riding retreat. I don't know, this is an interesting one. There's a lot of different stuff mixed in here. Like, it's almost a kind of coming of age story, even though the women are older, they're in their 20s and 30s, but there's a lot to do with, yeah, sexuality and relationships and getting to know yourself and who you are and things like that. An interesting novel, and another one of those like almost claustrophobic, stuck in the middle of a winter wonderland, but in this giant mansion, you know, kind of like The Shining sort of thing. And yeah, there's that one. Next, I read Felix Blackwell's Stolen Tongues. This is about a young couple who stays in a cabin. There are some creepy things that are happening outside the cabin. It seems like people are asking for help, but they come to find out it's not really people. And then he ends up finding that his wife is communicating with whatever is outside of the house in her sleep. Next, I read Rings by Koji Suzuki. This is the novel that the movie The Ring is based on. Oh yeah, it was first published as Ringu. Anyways, weird book. It's kind of like The Ring, kind of, but also very weird. Actually, it's not really anything like The Ring. It's actually more like Ringu, the Japanese version of The Ring, than it is the American version. I did a whole movie verse book on this, so I'll leave that link down below if you guys want to hear the absolute wild ride that is this book. Maybe one of the strangest books I've ever read to date. The next one that I read here is Just the Nicest Couple by Mary Kubica. This one, was it an audiobook or ebook? I'm not sure. This was about a man, so there's two couples, and this husband goes missing, and then this couple has a secret, and you're trying to figure out what happened, how they know that this guy, I mean, they know each other, but how they know what happened to him or if something did happen to him. But the story is actually, like, nothing else really happens but that in the whole story. That's kind of it. And you're just going through and reading different people's perspectives. Next, I read Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica. This is about an illness that infects all livestock, all animals, I suppose. So we're not allowed to eat meat. The people in here aren't allowed to eat meat. And so they start raising humans to be consumed by other humans. There's a whole lot of comments on a whole lot of things in here. I just realized that I'm writing the books that I don't have physical copies of with me on little sticky notes, so I hope I don't miss one or two, but I might. There's that one. Next one, I have Black Mouth by Ronald Malfi. This was one of my favorite books I read this year and is still being borrowed by someone. This one is about a group of friends, specifically one man who's having a lot of issues with addiction, with alcohol. He ends up going to his childhood town to meet up with other friends that he had when he was younger, and they kind of work through some weird childhood related stuff about this man that kind of befriended them when they were little and what exactly he was and what exactly happened. It's a very interesting story and what started my whole obsession with Ronald Malfi. Next, I read another Darcy Coates. This is The Twisted Dead Gravekeeper 3. I believe this one came out last year, and so I read the second one, yeah, and then picked up the third. So this again is that girl who wakes up and doesn't remember who she is, and you just get a little bit more of her story. Alrighty, on to March right here. First book that I read in March was Children of the Night by Dan Simmons. This is kind of a vampire tale. It's about this doctor who goes to work, is it in Romania? Yeah. And she ends up finding a young boy, an orphan there. Oh man, the description of the orphanage is just so absolutely heartbreaking. But anyways, she ends up meeting this one specific orphan who's just a baby, and she realizes that something is wrong with him and that he will die if he stays in Romania. He needs to get back to the US to get the care that he needs to survive. So she ends up adopting him, taking him back, and learning some very interesting things about his anatomy that isn't quite normal. And then it goes into the whole backstory and how he got there and all sorts of stuff. Next up, we have Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. This is actually a bunch of short science fiction stories that were written and then eventually turned into a novel. I can't remember the word that they use, and I don't know where my phone is, but there's a specific word, you know, where it's a bunch of short stories and then it's eventually linked into a novel. It still, I think, reads like a group of short stories, but they all surround Mars, and they all have a lot of common themes about humanity and kind of how we just kind of fuck everything up, and a lot of ego and things like that. I don't know, it's an interesting book to read, but for me it definitely reads a little bit more like individual stories than a full novel. The next one I read was Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. This is about a young girl that gets possessed, but it's not really. It's about more than that, but that's the basis of the story. It's more about how the men try to help her and what it means and things like that. I think there's a little bit more in here than just a typical story about a girl being possessed, but that is kind of the basis of the story. But I absolutely love that one. Okay, next up I read Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. This book ruined my life, and this is about a girl, it's a true story, unfortunately based on a true story, about a young girl who goes and stays with a family next door and ends up being just brutally tortured by everyone in the neighborhood. It is tough to read, and man, I hated this book. But like, it's good, you know what I mean? It's not a bad book, but I hated it because it hurt so bad reading it. Next up here, I read A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham, and I'm gonna have to find my phone because I know that I listened to 2 books on audiobook and I can't remember which is which. So, oh my gosh, yeah. This is the one that I was not too fond of. Okay, this is about a girl. She's older now, but it talks about when she was a teenager, how young girls disappeared in her small town. Her father was arrested for their murder, and then 20 years later, now she's like a psychologist or something, and she goes on to find that the murders are starting up again, and so they don't know if it's a copycat or what. To me, it just was the most probably obvious book that I've ever read. There was just no other option besides what ended up happening in the book. It just was so unbelievably obvious. The red herring was terrible. It just was not a book for me. But people like it. It has 4 stars. So that's just, you know, just because I don't like a book or a book isn't for me doesn't mean that you guys won't. Next up, I read Kurt Vonnegut's Breakfast of Champions. This one is like, it's one of those ones I'm like, how do I even explain this? So it's about Kilgore Trout, a character that is repeated in his novels. And then it's about another car salesman. And it tells you in the beginning, this book is about what happens when these 2 people meet. And that's what the book is. It's just kind of what leads up to them meeting and then what happens after they meet. It's a Kurt Vonnegut book. What can I say? You know, it's a wild ride. But man, do I love his work. Next, I read Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco. And this is about a couple who rents a house for a summer vacation, but it turns out to be more than meets the eye, you know? It's maybe a little bit haunted in some stuff. Next, I read Knock 'em Stiff by Donald Ray Pollock. It's almost a collection of group of short stories, but the characters all come back around and meet up, and it's about the same town, so it's more, yeah, he has such a unique way of writing, but it's definitely not a collection of short stories, although it kind of feels that way, but if you pay attention, they do link up. So it is a full novel on its own, but not written in a typical novelesque way. Really messed up, you know, it's Donald Ray Pollock, what else would you expect? Next, we have Tess Gerritsen's The Surgeon. This is about a man who is a serial killer. He ends up being murdered by one of his victims. Then there's another series of murders that happen, and the girl who killed the original serial killer gets mixed into it somehow. They don't know if it's a copycat or what happened, and they call him the surgeon because he steals women's uteruses. It really does give Silence of the Lambs kind of feel when you're reading it. What's next? Am I only on April? Yeah, I guess so. Jeez. Okay. The first one in April that I read was Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I'm really glad I read this one. This was my first time reading this guy, and yeah, I thought it was good. The vampire elements are very, very little in it. It's about this town called Jerusalem's Lot. Yeah, the vampires kind of take over the town. And little on the vampires, but there's so much character development in this. I think it's just a testament to how great Stephen King's storytelling can be. Next, I read, oh no, this was an audiobook, What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. This one was a little bit challenging for me because, again, it's based on a true story, and although I think that's fine when things are inspired from true stories, and not that it follows the true story that closely, but I think that when it's a true story that you kind of grew up hearing, like, you know, so well, it does make me feel a little, I don't know. Let me know how you guys feel about stuff like that, because I enjoyed the story. I liked the way it was written, and I enjoyed listening to it. It's about this girl who had a horrible accident when she was younger. She was attacked by someone. They caught the killer. He is in jail, and then she goes to meet up with her friends who were also there the day that she was attacked, and they are kind of like working through things and figuring things out. But yeah, I don't know. It just kind of makes me feel, just thinking about the person that this actually happened to. I don't know. That's all I have to say is I don't know. Next, I read Tess Gerritsen's Harvest. This is one that just has like such an important, profound message to it. It's about these young boys who are being harvested for their organs from a different country. I can't remember where they're from. And it's about a surgeon who's trying to, you know, do the right thing and save people. And she comes to find out that there's kind of this organ transplant gang of people. And so she is determined to do the right thing and break it down. But it's a lot about how money can kind of get you anything you want, and just gross, icky stuff like that, but important to discuss. This is The Fullcraft Ghosts by Darcy Coates. This is about two kids who their mom is hospitalized, so they have to go live with their grandpa and grandma, and just weird things are happening, and they learn a little bit more about their past and where they come from, and, you know, little creepy things here and there. This is This Perfect Day by Ira Levin. This is about everyone being in this family. It's like a dystopian futuristic novel, and the family medicates you to kind of keep you subordinate, and then it's about people who rebel against that and try to break out of the family, what that really means and what their life looks like outside of it and what could potentially happen. And very interesting book, great science fiction novel. The next one I read was Tess Gerritsen's The Apprentice. This is the second one to The Surgeon. I didn't like this one as much. It's the books that Rizzoli and Isles is based off of. I've never seen that show, but Rizzoli is the main character in this one, whereas The Surgeon, you had other main characters, and I just don't know if she is as strong enough to carry a book by herself in this one. But you have, you know, kind of the same serial killer, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. This was Elevation by Stephen King. I don't understand how this is a horror novel. If someone could explain that to me, then that would be great. But it's about a man who keeps losing weight but not losing mass. Like he's physically the same, but he keeps weighing less and less, and kind of what happens. It's a cute story, don't get me wrong, but very, very confused how that won best horror book whatever year it was published. Next, I read Isaac Asimov's The Caves of Steel. These are the books that the iRobot movie is based off of. And this is number 0.5, and I think iRobot is number 1 in the series. But this one was about a police officer. Oh man, I'm trying so hard to remember. It's about a police officer who, somebody gets murdered, and so he has to figure out who the killer is. And the robots live outside of town. He has to go and meet with somebody to help solve the crime, and that person is a robot, and then they continue on. But yeah, kind of like a silly, I don't know. It's definitely silly at times. But now let's move on to our May books. Next, I read Andy Ware's Project Hail Mary. Wait, is it called Project Hail Mary? Oh my gosh, it is. I always thought it was just called Hail Mary. Oh, okay. Anyways, it's about this man. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to tell you what the back says because I don't want to give anything away in this book, but it's about this man who wakes up on a mission in space, and he doesn't remember who he is, where he got, or how he got there, or what he's supposed to be doing. And so his memory comes back little by little, and you start putting the pieces together and try to figure out, yeah, who he is and why he's there. Next, I read Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, one that I have read before. It's about firemen, but instead of saving things from fires, their sole purpose is to destroy books. Yeah, it's an interesting book to revisit every now and then. Next, I have Black Mouth by Ronald Malfi. Didn't I already talk about this one? Uh-oh. Now I'm confused. Okay, I wrote Black Mouth down twice, so I did not read it twice this month. What's going on? I may have missed another book. Sorry guys, I don't know. I don't know what that's about. I don't know why I wrote 2 Black Mouths, but yeah, it's a great book. Okay. Next, I read Tess Gerritsen's The Sinner. This is the 3rd in the Surgeon series, and this one Isles comes in, so it's Rizzoli and Isles. In the last one she was just kind of mentioned, but now we get a bit more of her backstory. The book feels a little bit more balanced with Rizzoli and Isles both in there, and this is about 2 nuns that are brutally murdered, and so they're trying to figure out what happened and what caused their death. Well, it was murder, but like who did it and why, that sort of thing. Okay, next I read The Troop by Nick Cutter, and this one was, I've definitely read Black Mouth right before this one. This one's a little out of order, I apologize. But this is about a group of young Boy Scouts that goes with their scoutmaster camping for the weekend on an island. Unfortunately, this man shows up who has some sort of disease, for lack of better words. And yeah, it's about what happens after he's introduced to the group of young Boy Scouts. Next, I read Lucy Foley's The Guest List. This is about a group of people who are having a small wedding on an island. You have the bride, the +1, the best man, the wedding planner, the bridesmaid, and something terrible happens, and so it's kind of like a whodunit, but very mild, slow burn type of book. But I really enjoyed that one. Last this month, I read Seed by Anya Allborn. This one was about a family. It's about a young man who experienced some sort of, I don't know, it felt like almost demonic sort of things when he was a kid. And then now that he's grown up and raised, he's worried that whatever that is has come back. His kids are kind of acting weird. It's, yeah, interesting. Next up, we have June. The first book that I read in June was The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James, sorry. And this is the first Simone St. James book I read. I thought this was so fun. You go back and forth in time. One year in 1982, a woman goes missing working at a hotel. Then in 2017, her niece goes to work at that same hotel to kind of figure out what happened to her and the mysteries that lie there. There's a little bit of haunting and supernatural. There's some mystery and thriller in there, but it is in the horror section and it is a horror book. So you get kind of everything in one. Next up, I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. One of the best books that I read all year. Absolutely love this one. This one is a science fiction thriller mystery as well. It's about a man, he's a scientist, and he's really contemplating what would have happened had he not started a family, married his wife, had a child, and instead focused on his career. So it's kind of the thought and balance between those, what could have happened, what could have been kind of thing. He ends up getting abducted and removed from his family, and he tries to make his way back to them, but it's so much more than that. That's just kind of what I have to say so I don't ruin the whole thing for you, but what a fantastic novel that is. Next I have Ghost Written by Ronald Malfi. I read this guy. It's just 4 novellas and they're kind of linked together but not really, and this one was not my favorite. It says in here that he has a lot of kind of, what do you call those, Easter eggs for his fans and stuff. But before this, I had only ever read one book that he'd written before. So I think I just kind of missed some stuff in here. And because Black Mouth hit me so hard, it felt a little just, you know, not on the same level as Black Mouth. Because I loved the other Simone St. James book, I picked up The Broken Girls. This again goes back and forth in time as well. You have a journalist, her sister gets murdered and dropped at this old boarding school for girls that's around her town. And so you go back and forth between when the boarding school actually worked in the 1950s, was actually running, and then in 2014, after this girl's sister gets murdered, she comes to find out that the school might actually be running again. So she starts digging and doing a little bit more research into that. Again, you have kind of the same thing. There's some supernatural and mystery and thriller, and it's still in the horror section. Next, I read The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. This again is a group of short stories, and it's told through the illustrations of ink on a man's skin. Very unique setup for a story, but yeah, a group of short stories in there. Most of these I think are kind of the same as the Martian Chronicles, like about Mars and space and, you know, typical science fiction stuff. But I think that there's a little bit of additional stuff in here as well, if I can remember correctly. Next, I read Kurt Vonnegut's Mother Night, one of my favorite books ever written. And this is about a man in World War II. He was a propagandist for the, is that the right word? Propagandist? Anyways, for the Nazi Party. And so he said horrible, horrendous things, and you're like, well, you can't be forgiven for that, you know, nobody can. But then you come to find out that through his message of propaganda, he was actually helping the Allies to defeat the Nazi Party, but you don't really quite know where this man stands, and there's just such a blending of morality in this book, and you don't really know how to read it or how to feel about it, how to feel about the characters. There's so much in here that is, I think, just interesting to read. And man, I love this book, and it kind of destroyed me a little bit. Next, I read Playground by Erin Beauregard, and this is about a playground that opens where young children are murdered on it. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is, an extreme horror book. Next, I read The Clown Hunt by Judith Sonnet. This is about a group of people. My dog definitely apparently doesn't like clowns, and this is about a group of people who goes on a mission to murder murderous clowns, and that's extreme horror as well, and boy is it extreme. Next, I read Ash Eric Moore's Carney. This is about a carnival that comes to town and abducts a member of a group of, oh no, maybe they abduct all of them. Yeah, I think they abduct a group of people and they're trying to get away. Next up, we have July. Okay, next I read Dead of Winter in the Dead of Summer. And this was about a group of people that go on an adventure in the mountains in the snow, but they end up getting stuck, their car breaks down, and then they make it to like a little shed in the middle of the woods, and they start getting picked off one by one. So I suppose it's kind of a whodunit, and yeah, they're just trying to figure out who's after them, and yeah, who killed them. It's an obvious whodunit, I think, but well written enough that I still enjoyed the story. Next up, I read Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. This is my, I don't even know what number time it is reading this. I don't think anybody needs an explanation of what this is. I'm sure we all know what Fight Club is. But anyways, I did a whole movie verse book. Well, I did more of an analysis on the book, which I'll leave linked down below, because I truly do feel like this is one of the most genius books ever written. And I think that it took, like, every time that I read the book, I feel like I'm able to pull back a little bit more of its layers to find the true genius behind it. So feel free to check out that video if you would like a little bit more information on that. I reread Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas by Hunter S. Thompson. It's been a while since I've read a Hunter S. Thompson book, so I decided to pick this bad boy up again. And if you haven't read this, I mean, highly recommend. It's just filled with debauchery. It's about Hunter S. Thompson and his lawyer. attorney. And is that the same thing? Is a lawyer an attorney? Anyways, they go on just this wild drug-fueled weekend in Vegas, and just the most insane stuff happens. It's a very interesting read from somebody who does not partake in using drugs. So anyways, I read The Stranger by Albert Camus. I reread this one. I think this is maybe my second or third time reading this book. One of my favorite books of all time. A really interesting story about a man who loses his mother. He's just so, I don't even know if nihilistic is the right word, although that's how I always describe him, but he's just so complacent and just doesn't care. I guess he is nihilistic because he doesn't really care about life either way and what happens. And it's written kind of in two parts, prior to him committing a murder and post him committing a murder. And he's still the same character in each. It's a really interesting book to sit down and analyze if you have time. Next, I read The Institute by Stephen King. This was not my favorite Stephen King book, but it's about an institute that houses young children that have supernatural abilities. Next, I read Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. And this is, I think, the third oldest vampire novel ever written. Vampires showed up prior in poetry and things like that, but the third novel, I believe. This was fantastic. It's people call it a sapphic vampire tale. I don't exactly know if that's how I would describe it, but it's about a young girl who has a friend come and stay with her, and weird things start to happen in the neighborhood. Next, I read Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. This was my first Riley Sager book that I read, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I thought it was fun. It's about a girl who gets kind of the opportunity of a lifetime to work in this really fancy building that is a pretty big historical building in her neighborhood, and she ends up meeting a writer that lives there that she admires, and a potential partner, romance partner, and some other people here and there. And yeah, some weird things start happening, and she starts questioning what's going on in the building. Next, we have The Vampire by John Polidori, and this is the first full-length vampire novel ever written. And this one was really interesting, kind of just to read through and see how vampires were portrayed in the first ever novel. It was actually written on that same excursion, that same weekend that Frankenstein was written with Mary Shelley, where they all were kind of huddled together in the winter, snowed in, and so they decided to have like a writing party, which just sounds so fun. Like, why don't I do that? I need to find some writer friends in real life so we could do that for the weekend. That sounds so fun. Okay, I think now we're on to September, correct? Next up here, we have Home Before Dark, another Riley Sager. So I don't know if you guys can tell how my reading goes, but my husband says that I get obsessive about things, and so I find one author that I really like and I continue to purchase their work. And so that's what I did with Riley Sager this year, and a few others, which I'm sure you have seen. But anyways, this is about a girl who grew up in a haunted house, and her parents ended up writing a book. Her father ended up writing a book about it and becoming somewhat notorious for living there and the story behind it. She never quite believed what happened. Her dad ends up passing away, and she inherits the property, which she didn't know her father still owned, of this haunted house that she grew up in. So she's determined to go back and see if her dad's full of shit like she originally thought. Next, I read Children of the Corn by Stephen King. So I didn't read the full thing. I've read stories here and there throughout the book, but I didn't read the full novel. But I did read Children of the Corn, and I'm sure everybody knows what that is, but that book really surprised me. Like, I promise you, if you're a fan of Stephen King and you watch Children of the Corn and you're not a fan of it, please read the book, because unfortunately I didn't read the story for so long because I didn't really like the movies growing up, and I read this and it's so much more than what the movies make it out to be. Like, honestly, one of the best short Stephen King books I've ever read, or stories, what have you. Next, I read Agatha Christie's Halloween Party. It was republished as A Haunting in Venice because the movie came out. And yeah, this was an interesting one. It's a whodunit, and I do enjoy Agatha Christie books, but this was, I think, my least favorite one that I've read from her. I mean, I haven't read tons and tons of her work, but this one wasn't my favorite. But it's about a Halloween party, and the adults are throwing it for the kids, and one of the kids says that she's seen a murder before and then gets drowned in a bucket of apples. And so, yeah, the detective comes out and tries to figure out who murdered her. Next, I read Baby Fights by Robert Essig, and this one is about drugging babies. It's an extreme horror book if you couldn't figure that out. It's about drugging babies with angel dust and making them fight to the death. It's actually, it was actually a cool book. Like, I actually enjoyed that one. And you would think, because it's more of an extreme horror book, that it would be really extreme and like very messed up. And like, don't get me wrong, babies fight to the death, it's pretty messed up, but it's less extreme than a lot of the extreme horror books that I read this year. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. Next, I read Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar. And this is, yeah, this was an interesting one. It kind of, I believe that this is a YA novel, and it reads kind of like a PG-13 teen slasher movie. It's about a young girl who moves to a town. They have this creepy clown as their mascot in the town, and eventually they go to a party and this clown comes out of nowhere and starts murdering people. And so, yeah, you kind of go along with the story then. But yeah, it was like a pretty cute story. I'm not huge into YA, but I did enjoy that one. Next, we have Ronald Malfi's Come With Me. This one... This one made me cry so hard. This is about a man who loses his wife. He finds that she has hidden stuff from him throughout their marriage. And so it's about, well, maybe I shouldn't go into it, but he tries to figure out why she has such weird things and why she's hiding it and what it means. And he goes on this whole journey. And as much as it is about that, it's also at its core just about loss and grieving and guilt and everything that comes along with all of those intense emotions. And I highly recommend if you guys are grieving, because there's such a good quote in there. Maybe I can find it for you actually. I mean, there's so many good quotes. One thing I know is the longer you spend in darkness, the easier it is for darkness to become reality. There's just so many great things in here. How about this one? That one family should sustain so much tragedy seems not only an injustice, but an impossibility. Yeah. And I enjoy horror that, I don't know, sort of helps you grieve in a weird way. Maybe that's just me. Oh yes, okay. Oh, this is one of my favorite quotes ever. It says, it's talking about grieving and how in the beginning, our loved ones kind of haunt us. It says, it's good for them to haunt you in the beginning. It's how we grieve. It's how we get through it without them. But after a time, we must let them go. They need to rest and we need to move on. We haunt ourselves. In the end, if we don't come to peace with it, if we can't resolve it, we haunt ourselves. Oh my God, I could cry. I love this book so much. Next, I have Pumpkin Spice and a Body on Ice by Willow Monroe. This was about a young baker who somebody gets murdered in the town and they try to figure out who did it. If you can't tell, this is my first experience in Cozy Mysteries, because in whatever month this was, September? Oh man, August comes before September. Well, whatever, we're doing September 1st. I did a lot of Pumpkin Spice books. This was the first Addison Moore book I read, the Murder in the Mix series. This is Pumpkin Spice Sacrifice. It's about a girl who sees ghosts of pets, of people that are going to die. So she sees a pet and she's like, uh-oh, and then realizes, you know, there's a murder. She's a baker in a cute town and she has to solve the murder because she has an unquenchable thirst for justice or something like that. It's so cute. Anyways, then I read Pumpkin Spice Haunted Twice by Jeffrey Shields. This was about a detective who's staying in a mansion. It was like so slapsticky and silly. Well, first he loses his briefcase and then it keeps popping up, and then he tries to solve a crime, but he does it by putting together a pumpkin spice latte. So he's like, oh, see this clue? This is the milk in my latte. And then, oh, see this clue? This is the coffee. Anyways, I also read The Great Pumpkin Spice Slaughter by Marco Minone. This was really fun. It's just about, about how white women are just obsessed with pumpkin spice lattes and they turn to murder because of it. Next, I read Stephen King's Holly. This was about, well, it's a whole series, this character Holly. She's in so many other Stephen King books, and I'll actually leave that video linked down below because I think it's helpful for anybody who wants to read this book, what they should read before that to kind of not be confused by this character. But anyways, yeah, it's just kind of like her additional story. There's a murder and she tries to solve it kind of thing. So now let's go to August, my bad. In August, I read May Fly by CJ Lead. Really enjoyed this one. This is about a girl who kind of connects with more nihilistic characters in novels, and she ends up just letting loose and letting her Patrick Bateman American Psycho free. And then I read Rage by Stephen King. So I didn't read all of the novellas in here, just Rage. This is the one that is out of print that you're not able to just find in bookstores. It's about a man who holds up his classroom and yeah, murders his teacher, and it's an interesting read. I actually did a whole video on that as well, so I'll leave that linked down below if you want a little bit more information on that. I also read Horace Walpole's The Castle of Otranto. No, I say that wrong, don't I? Otranto? And this was the first Gothic novel ever written. So it was interesting, but also, yeah, a little bit strange. It's about like giants, and it's about a curse on this family in this castle, and then a giant's hat falls from the sky, and then yeah, you just go on this really weird journey. And the next one that I read was Dead Inside. This is by Chandler Morrison, and this is an extreme horror book about a man who is into necrophilia, and he meets a doctor who's into some unusual things for herself. It's a messed up book, I'm not gonna lie. It's probably one of the more messed up books I've read in a while, but it's also, I think, at its core about finding people you fit in with, and there's something kind of beautiful about that. Call me messed up, I don't care, whatever. It is what it is. Next, I read Duncan Ralston's Womb, and this one is about a man who has a sex worker meet him in a hotel room. He kind of goes on to explain different things that have happened in this hotel room, disturbing things, and he has her there for a purpose, which is revealed at the end. Another extreme horror book. Another one, I read Cows by Matthew. I was calling him Matthew Stocco, and you guys corrected me and says his last name is Matthew Stokow, which I thought was rather interesting. This, again, a really messed up book, but I also kind of enjoyed it in some weird ways. I have all of my extreme horror books linked down below, so if you guys are interested in any of those, or any of these that I'm talking about, they're in those videos I've done, kind of reading vlogs throughout and explain them. But this is about a man, his mother forces him to eat just disgusting, vile things. He goes to work at a processing farm, like where they, a meat plantation, what are they, well, I don't know what you, slaughterhouse? I don't know what you call them. Anyways, he meets a cow that speaks to him, and then weird things happen. I mean, the story is just, it's weird. But anyways, next up, but I think that there's more below the surface than just the weirdness. Anyway, not for everyone, I get it, but an interesting book nonetheless. Next, I read Lucy Foley's The Paris Apartment. This is, yeah, another Lucy Foley book, and this one says the socialite, the nice guy, the alcoholic, the girl on the verge, the concierge, everyone's a neighbor, everyone's a suspect, and everyone knows something they're not telling. Geez. And yeah, this is about a girl who goes to stay in this apartment complex because her brother went missing from there, and then you get to know the characters kind of one by one, and then the story comes back around. And yeah, it was an interesting read. I really do enjoy Lucy Foley books, all the ones that I've read, I think. Well, I'll talk about that one later. But anyways, this is Riley Sager's The Last Time I Lied. This has been my favorite Riley Sager book so far. This was a blast. It's about a girl, when she was younger, she stayed at a camp, and 3 of her camp mates, her roommates, ended up leaving in the middle of the night to disappear forever, to never come back. So 20 years later, she's going back to the camp to try to, you know, have some closure, and she starts finding clues and weird things that were left behind because the camp ended up closing back then, and it's just reopening now for the first time, and some weird things happen. And yeah, she goes on a mission to just try to figure out what else could have happened to those young girls. We're back on track. We're going to October now. The first book I read in October is Riley Sager's The Only One Left. This one came out this year in 2023. It's about this young woman who supposedly murdered her parents when she was younger. She's kind of the urban legend of the town. She lives in this beautiful castle kind of up in her own property. And there's a woman who works as a health aide, kind of like a nurse, I suppose, in-home nurse, and she ends up being assigned to this woman. And she goes to try to take care of her, and the woman can type, but she can't speak, and she says, "I want to tell you everything that happened." And then the story continues. Interesting concept. The next one is Cutie Pies and Deadly Lies. So this is the Addison Moore book, the Murder in the Mix series I was telling you about when I read it back in September, and I wanted to go back and read the first one because the one that I read was number 3 in the series, and so yeah, I ended up going back and reading that one. Again, same sort of stuff happens, a murder, and she tries to solve it. The next one that I read was Things Have Gotten Worse Since the Last Time We Spoke by Eric LaRocca. And yeah, this one was interesting. I really rather enjoyed this one. It's about 2 women who befriend each other online, and the entire story is told through emails, text messages, and direct messages. Direct messages? No. What do you call those? Like kind of, I don't have the book on me. My friend's borrowing it, so I can't look at the book, but it's like instant message kind of messages, I think. And yeah, weird and fun, and I enjoyed it. The next one that I read was It's Me, Charlie. This is by C.M. Guidross. It's about a man that befriends a booktuber, a bookstagrammer, somebody who talks about books online, and she's a writer herself, and she writes more erotic fiction. So because he has read her erotic fiction, he thinks he knows what she wants, and so he abducts her and tries to make her his girlfriend. Next, I read Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. This is another extreme horror book. It's about a woman who befriends a serial killer in jail, and he asks her to go on a mission to meet this riverman and bring him something, and it's a really interesting book, but I don't have it because my friend's borrowing it. Next, I read His Pain by Rath James White. This was another extreme horror book. Super messed up story. It's about a young boy. Something's wrong with it in his brain, and every sense his brain perceives as pain. So touch, smell, sight, hearing, everything is painful to him. His parents hire someone. He says that he can help break this sort of pain in him, and he ends up kind of conflating pain and pleasure, and the story just continues from there, and it's just a whole nother level of fuckery. Talia, and another extreme horror book by Daniel J. Velope. It's about a woman who is forced into the porn industry, and horrible things happen, and she ends up making more snuff films, and yeah, and then the story continues from there. It's a whole lot. And then next, I read Jack Ketchum's Off Season. This one was just cannibalism galore. It's about a group of friends that go to rent, I suppose, what would now be like an Airbnb. Cannibals break in and murder them and take them away, and the police are trying to solve what happened, and the people are trying to survive, but it's just absolute debauchery. The story starts, I wouldn't say mundane, but by the end I'm like, holy shit, like it is just a ridiculous amount of cannibalism. Next, I read Recursion by Blake Crouch. Man, this book was so Blake Crouch has, I swear, one of the most original books that I've ever read. This is about, how do I even explain this? It's about something, they think it might be a disease. People are remembering past lives that they never had, and it's leading them to go mad and to take their own lives, and horrible things are happening. It's about a detective. It's also about a woman who's a scientist, and they are each kind of on a mission to try to figure out what's happening. But this book will give you anxiety. It will. It's stressful to read. I mean, talk about just impending doom and an existential crisis at 3 in the morning. If you want that, read that book. A really fantastic read. Next, I read Norman Partridge's Dark Harvest. I've read this one multiple times. It's such a cute little lore folktale kind of story about this little October boy that comes out. He's got a pumpkin head and his body's filled with candy, and the boys in town have to murder him before midnight or something awful happens, and it's freaking adorable. Next, I read Bobbing for Bodies. This was the second in the Addison Moore Murder in the Mix series. Again, just murder happens and she has to solve it. Oh my gosh, we only have 2 months left. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Next one, November, I read Death by Pumpkin Spice by Alex Erickson. And this one didn't have anything to do with pumpkin spice. No one died. Just after they died, they like fell onto a pumpkin. Whatever. Anyways, yeah, it's about a murder at a Halloween party. I read it on Halloween, but then I finished it in November. And yeah, it's about this girl who's dressed up as Sherlock Holmes at the party. So apparently that qualifies her to work with the police to try to solve the crime. It was an interesting one. It showed me that I don't love all cozy mysteries, that there's just, you know, 1 or 2 that I've been fond of so far. Next, I read Darcy Coates' Whispers in the Mist. This is the third in the Black Winter novel series, and my goodness, I love this one so much. It's about this stillness or something. I can't remember. I never remember what it's called, but it takes over these cities and there are monsters and people are trying to figure out what's going on. And this is about a girl who ends up meeting a man after being attacked by these monsters, and she doesn't know if she can trust him, and then the story continues. And the first one, you have like a potential romance. The second one is more action-based, and then this one's a little bit more serious and kind of heartbreaking. I've really loved that one. Next, I read Erin Beauregard's The Slob. This is about a woman, a door-to-door vacuum saleswoman, and she ends up being abducted by a man who is a slob, and it's a pretty interesting story. I did a whole movie first book, no. I did a whole reading vlog on that one as well. Oh, and same with this one. I read George Bataille's Story of the Eye. I think that's how you pronounce it, but forgive me if I pronounce it incorrectly. And this is just a whole lot of fuckery. It was written in 1928. Okay, this just says it's erotic fiction. It's about a young woman and man, and just about their like debaucherous tales. My camera was so sick of hearing me talk about books that it died. So I hope I didn't miss anything. The next one that I read was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. It's about 4 women, an anthropologist, a surveyor, a psychologist, and a biologist who go into this place called Area X. Something strange is going on there and they're trying to figure out what to do, what they're looking for. That you don't really know anything, and you go in kind of blind as the scientists are, not really knowing what to expect. And you don't really get answers in that one, but it's part of a trilogy. Next, I read another Blake Crouch, the Pines series, the Wayward Pines series. This is number 1, Pines. It's about a man who wakes up in a town and he can't seem to find his way out of, and he can't get a hold of anyone, and people are acting very strange. And it feels almost like an episode of The Twilight Zone, although it is based off of a different show that I've never seen before called Twin Peaks. So that might be a better representation of what that is, if you guys have seen that show. And next up in November, I read The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This is about a woman who has had issues with drinking, and so her mother has kind of pushed her to live at their lake house to kind of get her shit together after her husband has passed away. She befriends a woman across the lake and starts spying on her. After that, the woman ends up disappearing, and she's convinced that the husband had something to do with it. So she goes on kind of a mission to prove that that is true. And now we have December, my friends, the very last month of the year. The first thing that I read was Ronald Malfi's The Night Parade. This is about an epidemic, a horrible disease that comes and messes with your mind, makes you go a little crazy. And it sweeps the nation, it kills whole towns, whole entire cities are destroyed, and it's about a man and his daughter. They're on the run. You don't figure out what's going on until a while later, but it kind of starts out with them on the road. It starts there, but then you also go back in time to experience what happened at the beginning of this epidemic and what led to this. And it's a really interesting book. I mean, I love Ronald Malfi. Next, I read Tastes Like Christmas, a holiday horror novella by K.L. Hears. It's about a group of thieves that end up in this small town on their getaway journey, and the town is obsessed with tropes in movies, and they have to follow along with them or something bad could potentially happen. Next is Alex Feeney's Rock, Paper, Scissors. This is about a woman and a man who are married, and you get to learn about their relationship through the gifts that they buy one another for their anniversary. So year 1 is paper, and then year 3 is leather and that kind of thing. And then so you get snippets of their past and how they used to be versus what's going on now, and how unhappy Mr. and Mrs. White are once they're on this vacation together, and what they used to be like versus now, and the story continues from there. An interesting story. Next, I read The Christmas Morning Massacre by Nasir Rabadi, and this was just about a massacre that happens over a Christmas holiday break where a bunch of friends get snowed in into a big cabin. The cabin used to be owned by a man, urban legend has it, that murdered his family, and then there's a supernatural kind of Santa guy that comes and kills everyone. Next, I read Santa Exploitation by Judith Sonnet, a fun little Christmas horror novella about Santa that is kidnapped by a group of women with ill intentions. And I read Let the Right One In by John Lindquist. This was a fantastic vampire book. It's, oh man, it was such a great book. But it's about a little boy who doesn't have many friends. He's picked on and beat up at school, and he befriends a little girl next door who ends up being a vampire. But the story is so much more than that. Little bits about vampires, and there's so much more about character development in the town and these people's lives than it is about the vampires. Next, I read Gingerbread and Deadly Dread, another Addison Moore book. She wrote these in the smartest way. They each correspond with a month of the year. So if you want to read them, you either have to wait an entire year. I mean, if you're like me and you want to read them on the months that they're written, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, she wrote them for each month. And so now I was telling my husband last night, because I just figured this out. I'm like, I'm gonna have to buy one of her books every single month this year. And by the way, there's 58 of these or something insane. So yeah, I'm gonna end up reading them all, because that's just the kind of bitch I am. Anyways, the last book of the year I read was The Wager by David Grann. What a fantastic nonfiction book about these men who sailed the oceans in the 1700s, and just the awful, horrible, horrendous, just life-threatening things that these men had to deal with and cope with. A lot of it is written through the eyes of the sailors, through their personal logs. Although it isn't like journal entries and there isn't a whole lot of emotion in there, man, just being able to see what they went through and having direct quotes from these men was a wild ride, and I highly suggest that book. Wow, did we do it? That's every book I read in 2023. Hi, sorry, I just finished filming this and I forgot to mention that I did read other things throughout the years, or throughout this year. So I read, like, for example, Baby in a Blender, The Unicorn Killer. I read The Little Mermaid. So there were some things that I read that I didn't include because I wanted it to at least be over, I can't remember what my cutoff was, if it was 30 pages or 50 pages, but I wanted it to be longer, and so I didn't include every single thing that I read in here. You get what I'm saying? But these are like my novellas, books, novel kind of reading. Okay, thanks. Back to the video. Please let me know down below what books you read, you know, how many books you read, what your kind of reading goals are. I am very proud of myself for reading 100 and whatever books that I read this year. So this is kind of my goal, is to maintain this level of reading, but obviously it doesn't matter how much you read. Just remember that if you read slower, it means that you get to spend more time with a book, and sometimes that's all you can really ask for. Sometimes you just don't want to say goodbye to those characters, you know? So thank you so much for watching, and yeah, let me know if you guys want rankings of these, or if you just want 2024 type videos going forward, and I will see you soon, now that I'm feeling better, with another horror video. Okay, thanks, bye.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.